Okay, let's continue on. I just say one more word about 229 in point L. Point L. There was an increase in demonic activity during the life of the Lord. And this again occurs one more time before the second coming. Bringing special accent, obviously, to Jesus. Now, manifestation. Obviously, he mentions different ways how demons serve Satan. You have demon worship that people are involved in. People are involved in spiritism and all sorts of things. Now, it's really hard to know to what degree some things that claim to be demonic and spiritism and all these things really are true. A lot of charlatans. A lot of, fakery. But there may be some real too. Demon possession, I think is possible. I do not think it's possible for a Christian, however. I don't see any evidence in Scripture at all that Christians can be demon-possessed, even though some have tried to argue it from experience. I knew a Christian that. Yeah, I've heard all these that, I always hear these reports on everything under the sun, Like I heard a guy who went to a foreign tribe and spoke to them in a language he'd never learned, and everybody became a believer. Well, what was this? Well, I just heard the story. I want eyewitness testimony, not rumors. And so, same thing here. There have been people who argue this, but I really find very little basis for it in Scripture. You can read Cook on this. Demonic influence, obviously. What is our defense against demons? Well, one is resist the devil, and he'll flee from you. That doesn't mean necessarily you rebuke the devil, you simply resist the devil. Remember I talked to you about Michael. But what about Ephesians 6? Whole armor of God, whereby you shall stand against the wiles of the devil, right? All the various parts. The fiery darts of the wicked one, the shield of faith, breastplate of righteousness, and on and on. Our defense is spiritual. Now, this does not mean this guards you against physical people. It guards you against spiritual people. Your breastplate of righteousness and your sword of the Spirit and your shield of faith will not guard you from people deciding to cut off your head. We're not discussing that. But see, we're concerned sometimes about the physical when we ought to be more concerned about the spiritual. The fact that we can avoid the spiritual is the major victory, not the physical. So when Paul says we fight not against flesh and blood, but against principalities and powers and rulers of darkness and high places, the point of it is that's our major battle. It's a spiritual battle. The destiny of the wicked, the demons, well, fire. Yeah.
Can't be possessed by them, but we can be influenced by them.
Well, I think a demon might be able to put a situation up that you fall prey to, if that's what you mean. But because I think they watch human nature and they watch you, but I don't think they can control you or make you do anything. You can't be demon possessed as a believer. Now, the problem of Genesis 6 now is next. There are three basic views with subviews. You can read the arguments here. I don't have to read them to you. But let me just say, the Sethite view has been held at least as early as the time of Chrysostom, which is in the 5th century. Or I take it back, late 4th century. And of course held by others who were very fine scholars, Calvin, Heinzenberg, and Kyle, and Kyle who did Kyle and Delitz's Old Testament commentary, Schofield, C.I. Schofield, Matthew Henry, and others. Trying to argue for the line of Seth. It sort of has a rhyme and reason to it, trying to pollute the godly line idea. Sons of God, it says, refers to unfallen angels or to believers in the Old Testament, they say. At least in these later books. Then intermarriage between angels and men is impossible, so obviously they say the angel view can't fit because you couldn't have an angel marry a human. The results of wedlock were nothing unusual. says they were, not came to be on the earth, so there were Nephilim later too. Some called giants. They run through the thing, and the point of it is that the argument basically is that this is an attempt by Satan to corrupt the godly line. The angel hypothesis is that sons of God in the Old Testament refer to angels, not to men. When you look at the terminology in Job and other places, it seems to be that way. There is a question. Why would it be that only the men Sethites like the women Cainites to marry? Why didn't you ever have any of the other groups? Why didn't you have any men Cainites liking women Sethites? I don't know what's the whole point. And secondly, it doesn't say they were Cainites or Sethites or anything else. It just doesn't say that. This view alone accounts for the sudden appearance of the enigmatic reference to Nephilim. In other words, why mention them in the text? Unusual progeny of the union. Now, Matthew 22:30 is not intended to prove anything other than the fact that in the resurrection, men will not procreate human babies. It says nothing about in the time and space now. And that has to be, admitted. Jesus is talking about in the resurrection, not now. You have the Septuagint, which is the Greek Old Testament used by the early church, in which, in at least some instances, here it's the word angeloi, which means that the Jewish people held the view. The passage in Jude 6 and 7 is fairly strong, trying to explain the idea about the strange flesh. And how else do you explain the whole idea of the angels leaving their proper habitation in that passage, since it connects it with the fornication of the sodomites? You can read the Tartarus thing there, but what's interesting is that a lot of church fathers held this view, but remember how you have a lot of ancient flood stories and a lot of ancient creation stories, and they have their origin, even if they diverge and some take on mythical qualities, all have their origin in truth. How do you explain all the angel men stories, or the super being men stories? In the ancient world, it's all over the place. So would they not have their origin in the same way that these other stories did? Although the Bible would give the true account. Now there's another view, that's a nobleman view. Meredith Kline argued this one, which he argued that reality, the sons of God here referring to noblemen, like superheroes, guys like Batman, Batman, people like famous heroes, who are great, sort of like extraordinary individuals, marrying commoners and producing these great men of renown. So those are the different views of that. Which view do I hold? Well, if you believe that angels here are demonic, well, you have a couple of different options. One, not that necessarily angels, which is possible possibly, that angels took human form and thus had sex with women and produced progeny. If that happened, there is a concern about the fact of how do you maintain the unity of the race in that without true humans. On the other hand, possibly if the giants never were able to remarry and never went on to propagate, it may be irrelevant at that point. But another possibility is that you have men who were demonically possessed, through whom the angels were involved with women and produced something. But it's really hard to, it's enigmatic, difficult to understand. I don't want to be dogmatic, but I tend to take the demonic view. Chapter 19. Satan. I want to start the unity of the race with man tomorrow night, so I'm going to move through Satan fairly fast, because I really do plan on letting you out of here soon, unless I hear a cry from the people otherwise. Okay, under Satan, his existence would be like other angels. He's created at the same time. He clearly does exist. And he's a personal being who is involved in trying to subvert the plan of God. Sort of funny, even people who don't believe in God sometimes even believe in some kind of evil being. His nature, again, he's created, he's spirit, he's a personal being, he's not a human being. He doesn't necessarily have all the traits of human personality, but he's nonetheless a personal being and spirit. Names. Look here. Lucifer, Satan, devil, serpent, Abaddon, Apollon, dragon, evil one, tempter, Beelzebub, Beelzebul, prince of the world, prince of the power of the air, God of this age. A lot of titles in the Bible and many others that other people have given him. All these titles say different things about him. We know him sometimes probably more normally as the Diabolos, the false accuser, who stands and accuses the brothers. Fortunately, we have a great defense attorney. And Satan, from Shaitan, adversary, one who resists. So these terms are given. Satan is debated. Let me just say this. Some people do not believe that Ezekiel 28 and Isaiah 14 speak of Satan at all. They think the passages are simply not talking about that subject. Even people that are evangelicals say that. And say those are just speaking of the rulers of these nations. But you know what, though? I can understand that these passages, in fact, do speak of the rulers of the nation. And remember in the Passion of the Christ, how this satanic figure didn't seem to be walking through the crowds. He just sort of slid through the crowds. Sort of a funny movement. And I'm going to suggest to you, when you read Isaiah 14 and Ezekiel 28, that there is a sense in which I think you are talking about the king of Babylon, and you are talking about the king of Tyre, but at the same time you're also talking about the king over the king of Babylon, and the king over the king of Tyre, who sort of moves in and out of the passage. At the same time you have the physical king talked about, you have the prince over that physical king talked about too. And I think that's what's going on in the passage. You read it for yourself. I'm not going to take the time. But I would encourage you to read Ezekiel 28 and Isaiah 14 on this. Read what Cook has to say. I think Cook has a good development of this thing. And particularly Genesis 28 when he says, you were perfect from the beginning of your days. That's not something you normally say about a king. And he said, you dwelt in the Eden of God. And he says, you were perfect until sin was found in you, which doesn't reflect the biblical doctrine of sin. And there are just many features about being the cherub. And all this terminology, I understand that in the ancient world you would use glorification titles for kings and exaggerations. I know all that. I mean, I've read ancient Near Eastern literature. Found in Babylon, Assyria, and other places. And they do use grandiose terms of the king. I never find terminology just like this that seems to have such biblical connotations to it that you don't find in the ancient world. And but I do find an idea that there is, I think, the physical king and the spiritual king interplaying in those passages. Because remember I told you before, over the king of Tyre was in fact the angel of Tyre. Same thing, yes.
If I'm saying correctly, so sin did not start with Adam, it started with Satan.
Sin started with Satan and he brought it to Adam and Eve. So I would suggest you read those passages. I am convinced that they are discussing Satan, particularly Ezekiel 28. There is that human dimension involved at the same time. I would suggest when you read, what is it, so Psalm 2 that talks about the Son of Man. What is the Son of Man that you do behold him? You know, the thing is, the writer of Hebrews says that it speaks of Jesus. But also I think it speaks of humans. Psalm 8. It speaks of, I had to take a look here, but it speaks of Jesus in a more particular fashion. And human beings in general. Okay, 240, Satan's work. He tempts Christ. That's one of his primary functions. That was a big deal, by the way. I mean, Satan could not have had any more, considering that his evil work to do, he could not have had a more important task than to try to make Jesus fall. I mean, that was a big task. You plan for your lifetime for the big play, So like, you've been on the bench, and this is a shot. We can make our touchdown and win the season. Just get out there and do it. You work for your life for this time, and you get out and miss it. And I love the passion of the Christ again. When Jesus died and said it's finished, when they just panned to Satan all of a sudden, and how he reacted to this death. Very, very, very great imagery expressed there. And I think that's what occurred, because Colossians 2:15 tells us that at the cross he disarmed the principalities and power and led them captive, triumphing over them in the cross. Very great imagery. So Satan's big job, he blew. He failed at his most important task, and that is to get Jesus to fall, which quite honestly was impossible. In my view, Jesus could not sin. He could not sin. Not only that he did not sin, he could not sin. For sin does not appeal to the body. It does not appeal to the material. It appeals to the spiritual part of me. But more importantly, it does not appeal to my spirit. It appeals to my person. The moral issues are dealt with at the person level. And since the person who indwelt the human Jesus was also the person who indwelt God, okay, one God, one man, in one person, two natures in one person, the one person in whom the two natures dwelt was initially and eternally bound to the deity. Then Satan, when he appealed to Jesus in the temptation, appealed to the person to sin, which then would be for God to sin. And I don't think it's possible. Plus, since Jesus was the perfect Lamb of God slain from the foundation of the world, even before creation, unless God has absolutely flawed knowledge, in reality, Jesus could not have had libertine freedom. Libertine freedom says that I always have the right of contrary choice, which would mean even that Jesus had libertine freedom and could in fact have truly sinned, and that defies all reason. God doesn't operate with libertine freedom. God cannot sin. He cannot lie. He cannot be other than He is. He does not have that freedom either. The concept we use of libertine freedom is an interesting concept. I know where it came from. I'll be talking about it when I deal with the nature of sin and the issue of salvation. But I don't buy into it. I'll discuss that more later, about the whole question of what free will is. Yes?
You said earlier that Jesus didn't know everything. He was limited.
As a human, in the human mind, he did not know everything.
Following that same concept, on the human side of Jesus, you
going to be our sacrificial lamb, did he have free choice to do or not do the will of God?
No, because I'm trying to help you to understand that Jesus is fully a human and He's fully God. But the one person dwells in the both. When you address the question of moral choice, it is addressed at the person, not at the physical, even the spirit. It's addressed at the person. So the person would have to make the choice to go to sin. The person who made the choice was also God. I don't think He can make a choice of sin. Plus, I don't think He can make a genuine choice of sin, or God's knowledge was imperfect. You understand me? He could have actually made a decision contrary to what was known for certain in the mind of God. Think about what that means. He would have made a choice that was known to be another choice in the mind of God, which means in the choice in the mind of God could not have been a certain knowledge, but only a possible knowledge. But we know God's knowledge is certain, not possible. He knows, in fact, what will happen for certain, not what will happen maybe. So He knew for certain that Jesus, in fact, would do what He did. So, in fact, Jesus in time and space could not do contrary to what God knew in eternity for certain He would do.
There you go.
Jesus, he approached Him as Jesus the man and not Jesus the Christ.
Well, no, Jesus the Christ is Jesus the man. You mean Jesus God? No, but see, the Christ is a title which he aspired to and received, the Messiahship. That's not the same question. He did approach Him as the Messiah, the man, because the Messiah is not a divine title; it's a human title. But He could not tempt God to sin in the sense that He could not tempt God in the divine nature. But really, in trying to get Jesus to sin, He's making a big mistake because He's actually approaching the person who, in fact, will not sin. Satan, remember, does not have all knowledge either. Satan has limited knowledge. And sometimes sin so clouds us, even Satan. Think about this. You think Satan, if he had his mind straight, would honestly believe he stood a chance as a limited, finite being to overcome the infinite deity? What a stupid concept. Again, that's like a newborn baby just out of the womb is going to beat a sumo wrestler up. I mean, that's too close in comparison. I mean, it just doesn't. It's stupendous stupidity.
That'll work.
Get that down. You'll need that Sunday morning. Yes, sir.
Would that then be when Jesus was on the cross and they asked Him, if you are who you say you are, come down? They were in essence tempting Him.
They were tempting Him, except the problem is they did not know that in fact if He had come down, He could not save. Remember what they said? It says, you who saved others, you cannot save yourself. They did not realize that they were making a double statement there, a double entendre. The fact is, that is true. He could not save others if He in fact did save Himself. They didn't know what they were saying. That's another story. That's a sermon I preach. Okay. Now, I'm sorry, sir?
It turned out pretty good.
Did I preach that one at your church too? I preach all these sermons at Henry's church. He's taking big notes. I don't know. In relationship to the unsaved, He blinds the minds to the gospel. He snatches away the truth. He uses men to advance false religion. He places evil in the heart. So how can anybody be saved? Not to mention the fact that He didn't even need to do all of that because men don't like God anyway. Our hearts are evil continually. Our heart, our mind, our emotions are all tended to evil and corruption. So that even if there were no Satan, we wouldn't want to be saved. And then you have Satan to double it and make it doubly difficult. How can anybody be saved? We'll talk about that this week. Now, in relationship to the believer, he attacks the believer, and also the believer, though, has support against him. And here's some things in which I think would be good to read, but we won't take the time that Cook gives on how Satan can be defended against, part of which we've already talked about. In relationship to God, he's the enemy of God. He is seen as opposing everything against God, just like the Antichrist is. What's so interesting, though, as strong as he thinks he is, as smart as he thinks he is, and his possibility of possibly winning he thinks he has, he's being used by God. See, God is sovereign. God controls everything. And when you come up with, well, yeah, he controls everything, but, then you don't understand what I just said. He controls everything. See this? God is controlling this. I did not say God is causing it, but He is controlling it. If He has the capacity to keep me doing from what I am doing and chooses, if He can't keep me from doing what I'm doing, then it's irrelevant to talk about control. See, so God controls everything, even if by allowing us to do things that we do, because they're not outside His control should He want them to be otherwise. Ask Jonah. Ask Balaam. See, He's in control, but see, when I say God controls, or I say God determines all things, I do not mean that God causes all things. Determination, control, and such terms, sovereignty, do not refer to causation necessarily, unless you want to mean ultimate cause or final cause, but not efficient cause. God does not directly cause all things, but He does, in fact, He does directly cause some things, even some things that infringe on our will. Okay? But He does not cause all things to take place, but He, in fact, clearly does allow things to take place that do, or they wouldn't happen. So now I have said that, Satan does not do a single thing apart from the permission of God. Some people don't like that one. So they write books like, why do bad things happen to good people? Rabbi Kushner trying to explain whether God is all powerful or God is all good, because he says He can't be both. So he came to the view that God is not all powerful, but He is all good. He just can't do everything He wants. Well, that's not my view. My view, first of all, is why do good things happen to bad people, not why do bad things happen to good people. There's an assumption we're good instead of bad to begin with. Secondly, the assumption is, why should we ever get anything from God? We don't deserve anything. What we do get is grace. So, so the point of it is, and on the third day, Now, not everybody in this class understands what I just did there. But there is a certain group of us. Early on Sunday morning. All right, let's go. Gotta go. Okay, in relationship to Antichrist, he enables the Antichrist to do what he does. He tries to destroy Israel. He gathers the nations against God. Satan is a busy guy. In Revelation, when he gathers the nations, he realizes, it finally dawns on him, my time is almost over. I think after he got socked in the pit for 1,000 years, he realized that maybe it's not going his way anymore. I think it had a major impact on his thinking in the Bible. And I say it's already had, because as far as God's concerned, it's done, but it hasn't worked out in history yet. Now, Satan's influence, the satanic world system, you can read this. I think I'm going to bypass this because I really do want to let you go. But His judgment and eternal... Tomorrow, let me tell you where we're going to be, if you can have a chance to read a little bit. We're going to start on the origin of man. We're going to cover the doctrine of man tomorrow for sure. I'm going to try to go faster. I've got this all on a PowerPoint, the whole thing. I didn't have the angel thing done that way, but I've got the other on PowerPoint. So I'm going to run through this stuff on man and sin tomorrow night if I can. Because I really want to take 3 days to develop salvation. A lot of stuff to talk about. But you won't appreciate it unless you understand the question of man and sin, particularly the doctrine of sin. See you tomorrow night.
Thank you.
Those people going to Israel